Here we have several instruments that are helpful in determining the hardness of rollers in some cases, the size of rollers, the setting of rollers. To start out with, we have a Shore Durometer gauge. Now the durometer of a particular roller is the hardness, and generally a harder roller will last somewhat longer than a softer roller. A softer roller may do a little bit better printing job to reproduce a given image on a sheet a little bit better. We have another gauge here that looks similar to a ruler that is used for measuring the diameter and the length of a particular roller. This particular ruler will give you a good measurement to 1/100th of an inch. Now if we want to go to a little bit more depth, we have a pi gauge that is good for measuring a roller size or diameter to 1/1000th of an inch. And it's got a vernier gauge on here, and you can get a good measurement of the diameter of a roller to a 1/1000th of an inch. The next gauge we have here is a dial indicator, and probably would not be used by most printers in a press room today, but it is used by most roller manufacturers to determine the surface of the roller is in good working condition, to make sure that there's no low spots, no high spots, and that's a very good instrument to determine highs and lows. It will give you an indication of in a 10,000th of an inch difference in height of a particular roller. Next we have a micrometer gauge, also used in determining thicknesses. Primarily you would measure plates and blanket thicknesses, possibly packing thicknesses with this gauge. It's good to a 10,000th of an inch measurement. Some printers, or most printers, may have this particular gauge on hand. Roller manufacturers may use a much larger instrument to determine the overall size or diameter of a roller. This is a 1-inch micrometer. They make micrometers in much larger sizes, 2-inch, 3-inch, 4-inch, 5-inch, and 6-inch sizes for the applications that are necessary. Next we have a roller setting gauge. Two methods that we use to set rollers is the stripe method and the strip method. This particular case, we would use this gauge to determine the proper stripe on a particular roller. And the way it would be used, let's imagine that this particular stripe is what we see on our ink roller. We would match up that stripe on the gauge. In this case, it happens to be 1/2 inch. We also have a ruler in inches, a ruler in millimeter, and also the gauge is marked off in millimeters if you want to use that side. Now we mentioned before the stripe method of roller setting. The pull method or strip method, we would use a tension gauge of this type. We would insert this between two of the rollers, and the harder we pull, we would get a reading on the gauge. In this case, a number 4 pounds of pull, and it would tell us how tight the two rollers are set together. Now if we want to get an accurate feel between the gear side and the operator side on a particular roller, we'd use this on one side to come up with let's say a 4-pound pull. Then we would go to the other side, insert it between the rollers, and come up with a 4-pound pull again. This is also used for strip method of roller setting, a feeler gauge, about 4 to 5 thousandths of an inch thick, and it's used again for inserting between two ink rollers and getting a feel just by hand, so you can tell if you're tight or loose from one side of the roller to the other. Most pressmen carry this type of gauge in their pocket, and they use it for a multitude of things. One of them is roller setting. Next we have a plastic strip, and if you can see this, it's also used for the strip method of roller setting, also 4 to 5 thousandths of an inch thick. Would use them two at a time, put one on one side of the roller, inch it in, one on the other side of the roller, inch it into the press, and get a feel by hand. Someplace to start. Not a real accurate method of roller setting, but it is a good place to start. Another method to determine the tightness between two rollers is a paper sandwich. And what you do with these is put the smaller of the strips between the two larger strips and put that between, or inch them between the two rollers. You will get no friction between the ink and the roller itself, and you'll get a real good positive feel on the tightness between two rollers with this sandwich. This particular press has a conventional style dampening system, and what's involved here is a water pan. We have a reservoir of water, a water pan roller. We have an ink ductor that is not installed at this point, or pardon me, a water ductor that is not installed at this point. It would go in this position. We also have a water form, which I will install. And what I'm going to do now is install the plastic strips between the vibrator and dampening form roller. We need one on each side, about 4 to 6 inches from the edge of the roller. What we're looking for here is a nice light drag, a nice light feel between the damper and vibrator in this case. Now I can either tighten, so I have to pull harder, or loosen to get that nice light drag. Too tight is going to squeeze out too much water. Too loose will not transfer water between the vibrator, damper, and plate. Next, we want to insert our strips between the dampening roller and plate cylinder. Again, we want two strips, each one about 6 inches from the edge, and we should also have a nice light drag between the damper and plate cylinder. Now we can see that we're starting to transfer ink between the vibrator and the form roller, the same on both sides. Again, we'll stop the press, wait a few seconds, maybe a 2 count or a 3 count, and again reverse the press and check our stripe. Now we can see that we've got a fairly uniform stripe all the way across the roller. Slightly lighter on this side than this side. So again, we'll tighten. Maybe a 1/4 of a turn or so. Again, we'll let our press run. Get rid of the old stripe. Distribute the ink, and we'll check it one more time. Stop the press. Wait a few seconds. inch or reverse, as the case may be, until we can see the stripe. All right, now we can see that we've got a real even stripe the entire width of this particular roller. We can use our little gauge here to tell exactly what we've got here. And I would say that's about a 3/16 of an inch stripe. According to my gauge, I got about 5 on that one, 5.5 on the other. The most accurate method being the stripe. I feel that that roller is set just about as well as it's going to be. After having made adjustments to our foam roller setting, we'll check it one last time. Put the foam rollers on. Wait a second. Take them off again. Move the press around to a convenient spot where we can see the stripe. Our number 4 stripe is here. Inch the press, number 3 foam roller. And we can use the gauge, about a 3/16 stripe. Maybe a fuzz light on this side, but better to be too light than too heavy. Move the press around again to the number 2 foam roller position. About a 3/16 inch. Again, a 3/16 inch. Maybe a fuzz lighter, but again, better too light than too heavy. The number 1 position. 3/16 right on the head. Again on the other side, about 3/16 or so. Now if we really want to get critical, as far as our foam rollers are concerned, we can do a 4-corner roller setting. We would set the rollers in this position, inch around 1/4 of a turn, stripe them again, inch around another 1/4 of a turn, make another stripe, and the last quarter make another stripe. And in that way we can see if we have any low spots on one side of the roller or the other. Now along with the foam roller setting, we've got a bunch of different rollers in the train that we should probably say a couple of words about. Most of them are set pretty much similar to what we've done with the foam rollers. You want to set all of your rollers to your oscillators or vibrators first, and then to the secondary position secondly. And most of these rollers can be set, your riders, your transfer rollers, your distributors, they can all be set in the same manner. By using the stripe that you see on this foam roller, you can readily see that it's even all the way across, uniform all the way across. That is probably the most important thing, is the uniformity from one end of the roller to the other.
Jim, if the rollers are not set properly, what are some of the problems that can occur on press?
Well, there's a multitude of problems that can be caused by improper roller setting or old rollers, bad rollers, deteriorated rollers. Obviously, if they're too tight in a lot of web applications, rollers will heat up and deteriorate even further and possibly explode. Obviously, too tight to the plate will cause slurring, improper dot values, dot gain. Rollers too loose, you're not going to transfer ink, obviously. You'll get a slur sometimes if rollers are not set properly. There's a multitude of problems that can be caused by improperly set rollers.
How about plate wear? Can plate wear be caused by improperly set rollers?
Well, that's a typical problem, probably one of the problems that you're going to see first, before you see anything else, is your plates are going to wear from one side of the press to the other. And typically, if you see plate wear on not only one job, but on successive jobs on one side of the plate before you see it on the other side, it's almost always due to improper roller settings, either too tight or too loose. Fairly typical style of web configuration, perfecting web press, blanket to blanket style, and the web comes from the Butler splicer in this case to a drive or in-feed unit, 2 printing units. Actually, it's 4 printing units, 2 on each side, 2 on the top, 2 on the bottom. These would represent the plate, blanket, and plate cylinder, with the web running between. A dryer, in this case a gas-fired tech dryer, a chill stand to set the ink, and a folder. And this is typically a style of web that you're going to see in the field today. Okay, we'll set the number 3 form roller to this vibrator first. And what we'll do is try to get our light drag to begin with using our feeler gauge. Now all I'm going to do here is to make sure that the roller is touching the way it should be on both sides. Now I can't get the feeler gauge in on this side, so I think we're probably a little too tight. This side may be too loose. Now we can do the same thing with our plastic strips. Not stiff enough to put in there by hand, we'll have to inch it in. That feels a little bit on the heavy side. Again on the other side. Not too bad on that side. We know that we're close. What we'll do is inch the press until we distribute all the ink on the rollers. And again, we'll stop the press and we'll look for a stripe on the form roller. And as we can see here, this particular roller is a little bit low from one side to the other. We can see an even distribution here and no distribution on the other side. Stop the press and wait a few seconds. In this case, reverse. And look for our stripe along the form roller. Now as we can see, the stripe is much heavier on one side than it is the other side. We'll go to our roller setting and make it slightly tighter. Inch the press again. get rid of the old stripe and distribute the ink again. Stop the press. Reverse in this case. And look for our stripe again. This side, I would say, is about 1/4 of an inch. And if we go along to the other side, we'll see we're slightly lighter here. We can tighten that setting just a little bit more. Now each one of the rollers in the roller train that we see up on top here can be set in the same manner. We've got our ink duckers, distributors, oscillators, transfer rollers. They can all be set in the same manner. Let's inch it around again. Get rid of that old stripe and see what it looks like. Okay, we'll stop for a second. Reverse the press, and hopefully come up with the right stripe. And I would say that that's a pretty even stripe from one side of the press, one side of the roller to the other. Now this web press happens to be pretty typical of what you're going to see in the field these days, and it has 3 form rollers. We'll use the same method of striping our form roller to the plate that we did on the other sheet fed press. Okay, we can see our stripe at this point, and we'll put the stripe gauge up here and see what we've actually got. Less than 3/8. Oh, a little bit heavier than 5/16. I would say that's a pretty good 1/4. And what we can do is just follow that across, 1/4 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch, and just a fuzz heavier than 1/4, but I would say that would be pretty close to what we're looking for. All right, next we're going to go to our plate cylinder and see what the stripe looks like to the plate. And again, this is a typical web unit configuration. It has 3 ink form rollers, 1 dampener. What we're going to be looking for here is the stripe from the form roller on the plate. Again, we are about 1/4 of an inch on our vibrator stripe. We're going to be looking for maybe just a little bit less than 1/4 of an inch to our plate cylinder. Put the form rollers on the plate. Wait a second. Take them off and inch the press until we can see the stripe. In this case, the number 3 form roller is the one we see first. Pretty close to 1/4 of an inch. The same. I would say pretty close to 1/4 of an inch again. For this size press, I would say that would be just about adequate. We'll inch the press again and go to the number 2 form roller stripe. Just about what we're looking for, 1/4 of an inch. 1/4 of an inch there. And 1/4 of an inch there. And to the next form roller, which would be the number 1. About a 1/4 inch stripe. Again, the same thing in the middle. And maybe a little bit looser, not quite a 1/4 inch on the operator side. Okay, this is our number 1 form roller stripe, and we're looking for about a 1/4 inch. That's almost. We'll go to the middle again, pretty close to a 1/4 inch, and to the to the gear side, just about a 1/4 inch. And that's the number 1 position on this particular press as far as the form rollers are concerned. And once again, each one of these rollers can be set in the same manner using a gauge and the stripe method of setting rollers.
Jim, just a couple of questions. Number 1, in sheet-fed presses, the setting to the vibrator is always a little tighter than it is to the plate. Any comments on how that would be the same or different for a web-fed press?
Well, I would say that web-fed is just about the same as sheet-fed regarding roller settings. You'd normally set it a little bit tighter to the vibrator than to the plate. The reason being, you always want your form roller or your riders driven by the vibrators. The vibrators are gear-driven rollers. They in turn drive the form rollers. You never want your plate cylinder driving the form rollers because it's going to cause a lot more plate wear. Your rollers will tend to skid, and you'll get long dots instead of nice, uniform, round, even dots.
Also, how often should rollers be set, and how long should they keep their setting? What are the circumstances that may change?
Well, there's a lot of things that can change a roller setting. If you have an older press, the hangers may be worn, and they need to be checked that much more often. Obviously, when you put new rollers in, you have to set them initially. I would say maybe a few weeks or so later, you might want to follow up with a second setting just to make sure that you maintain what you originally had. Form roller settings, I would say it's you could check them almost every day. When you're plating up your press in the morning, you might want to just drop the form rollers on the plate to make sure that you got what you think you have. On web press applications, there's a cocking device on the plate cylinder, and that will affect your form roller setting. If you cock your plate reverse or advance, retard or advance, you'll change your roller settings. So you must check your form roller settings, especially almost every day.
Would you advocate the setting of the 4 corners of the rollers on particularly tight jobs in web applications?
I think it's probably a good idea to check it all the way around. You can get an idea if you got some low spots in your rollers. Most web applications, you're going to have maybe a few bad rollers in there. You can't afford to replace them quite as often as you would like to. So it's a good idea, yes.
How about the water side? How would you set the water side rollers?
I would recommend just about the same routine that we did with the ink rollers here. A little bit tighter to the vibrator, a little bit looser to the plate than you had to the vibrator. And the reason being the same. You always want your vibrator to drive the rubber roller so you don't get a skid on the plate cylinder. You don't cause too much wear on the plate cylinder also.
Is there any difference in setting the soft rollers versus the hard rollers?
Well, soft rollers are a little bit more forgiving. You can probably say you can set those slightly tighter than you would a normal form roller. Like I said, soft rollers can cover a multitude of press problems, especially in older equipment.
How about a few tips on setting hickey pickle rollers, which are a little bit different than the ordinary ink form rollers?
It's probably a little bit harder to set an a hickey picker than it would be a regular foam roller, because you've got that fuzz on the surface and you really can't see the stripe like you see in this case here. So generally they would have to be set slightly tighter to the plate cylinder. You have to be a little careful though that you don't get too tight. You'll wear your plate cylinder or your plate image that much faster.
Finally, Jim, what sort of problems can occur if the rollers are not set properly on a web press?
Well, as we stated before, you can have a multitude of problems that can be roller related. Improper dot size, long dots, dots shaped like footballs, plate wear, improper dampening, improper inking. Obviously, if your rollers are too tight, you're going to wear your plate cylinder, plate image. If your rollers are too loose, you won't transfer any ink, and obviously you won't print. Okay, this is a Shore Durometer gauge, and it tests for roller hardness. And the way we would use this particular gauge is you zero the pointer and kind of roll it across the crown of the roller, and then you can see, in this case, about a 35 durometer. Okay, we're going to measure this particular roller, the diameter and the length, and we're going to use what looks like a regular measuring tape here. One side is an inch increments, and the other side is for the diameter of the roller, and we'll go ahead and measure the length first. And we're 38 3/16 inches long. And now for the diameter. And this measures in hundredths of an inch. So this particular roller is 2.11 inches. This is a typical Dahlgren metering roller dampening system. We have a water pan, a metering roller, a water pan roller that you can see right through here, the chrome roller, the Dahlgren foam roller, which carries water and ink. It's in contact with the ink train and the water system. We can see the typical adjustments for the Dahlgren system. The metering roller adjustment, tighten on one side, not on the other side. You will have less water on one side than you do on the other side, or if you loosen, you will have more water on one side than you will on the other. It also has a skewing mechanism that allows you to throw the metering roller out of parallel with the pan roller. It produces less water in the middle, more water on each end.